Well, g'day and welcome to week number 4 in our Chronological Bible-in-a-Year reading challenge. This week we are again in the book of Genesis, reading chapter 30 through to 47. So I really hope you enjoy that this week. In the meantime, sit back, relax. Here is today's tutorial. Well, good morning everyone and happy weekend. It is the last weekend of summer. And so I thought I'd do a beach scene today, and it is very much the last week of summer. It seems like we're well and truly into autumn, but anyway, there you go. It's also week 4 of our Chronological Bible Reading Challenge. We're reading through the book of Genesis. Hopefully last week you finished your readings up to chapter 30, and so essentially we've been introduced to the lives of the patriarchs, okay, or the founding fathers of God's covenant people. This week we're doing chapter 30 through to 47, which essentially continues on with the story of Jacob. Okay, there he is working for his father-in-law. But the focus or the main character that we're going to be introduced to this week is a guy called Joseph. Now, listen, it's 17 chapters, all right? Let me just say this again. I sat down yesterday, read through these chapters, and I did so in just over half an hour, all right? And I was taking notes. So it's an easy read if you just allocate a good half an hour to an hour, all right? Turn off your TV, get away from that for an hour or so, go to bed early one night, read this in bed, or get up early just one morning and read it together in one sitting. All right, I've said at the start that a lot of our Bible reading plans give you daily readings, 2 or 3 chapters a day, but sitting down and reading good chunks of the scripture really helps to do what we're trying to do in this series and give you an overall big picture view of the story. So I encourage you again, do that this week. Chapter 30 to chapter 47 will take you less than an hour to read that. Okay, so that's that. Now, what you're going to read this week, as I said, is the focus on Jacob's story, whose name gets changed to Israel, into the story of Joseph. And as I said last week, and you will definitely notice this week, is that the, the sex lives of these patriarchs and their wives, okay, is really eyebrow raising. And so it's probably a good time just to remind you that these stories that we're reading are set in a completely different cultural context to you and I here today in the 21st century, all right? These stories are 4,000 years old. They were written around about 3,500 years ago. So this is a total nother world to what we're talking about. So as you read about their attitudes towards sex and sleeping with different wives and concubines and just go and sleep with my servant girl, you know, this type of thing, don't freak out. That is not saying that that is God's will. Okay? It's recorded in the story, but that nowhere does it say that God was endorsing that lifestyle or encouraging that lifestyle. It's just a description of how this group of people, like all the people in that ancient world, lived at that particular time in the ancient Near East around Mesopotamia. So just keep that in mind and don't freak out, which is a great reminder to remind us that, you know, the Bible, it wasn't written in the 21st century, okay? My Bible at the front here in the notes says copyright, NIV, copyright 1984. But newsflash, it wasn't written in 1984. It was written thousands of years ago about a completely different cultural context. And I was reminded about this week when we are reading at the end of Joseph's story in Egypt. Joseph institutes for Pharaoh a 20% tax, okay, on Egypt. And it says there in the text that this tax is still in force by the pharaohs to this very day. And I thought, well, no, it's not. A 20% tax is not in force in Egypt by a pharaoh to this very day, but it was to the very day the story was written, okay, 3,500 years ago. We are reading a story that has a distinct time period to it. And it is also a story that has a distinct locale to it as well. Because when you read the account of the famine, for example, that's going to be happening in Egypt, it says there that the famine affected the whole world. And it says that countries from all around the world came to Joseph to get grain. Now let me promise you, 3,500 or 4,000 years ago, countries like Fiji and Vietnam and China did not come to Egypt to see Joseph. Okay? When it says countries from all over the world, it was talking about the known world to that people at that time. We see this happen in Luke's gospel when it says in Luke chapter 1 or 2 that Caesar took a census of the whole world. And that's why Mary and Joseph went to Nazareth, okay? Because Caesar took a census of the whole world, all right? But it wasn't the whole world, it was the whole Roman world. And so the same way here, the whole world does not go into a 7-year famine. It's just the known world of the time of the people. In fact, the word there in Hebrew is also often translated land. Land and world, okay, often interjected in the English. Sometimes it's unhelpful. The point is, why am I saying this, Chad? The point is, I was just reminded a few times in my reading this yesterday that the fact is we're reading a document that has a distinct time period to it, and that is something we really need to keep in life. Anyway, the main part of the story, or the main thing that this story deals with, is all about the complexity of family life, all right? Last week we read in the story of Job about the complexity of friendships, okay, and how complex they can be. This week the whole focus is about the complexity of family life, and that's something I'm sure that we can all relate to. It starts with Jacob, who's working for his father-in-law, and he ends up running away from his father-in-law. He just does a runner, all right? He just breaks off that relationship and disappears without saying a word. He walks up to his brother Esau, and he's united with his estranged brother. Remember the brother that he ripped off with the bowl of soup and all that and the hair? Okay, he walks up to that brother, and that brother forgives him for his betrayal, which is incredible, because I just saw this week that as that brother, as Uncle Esau forgives him, the 12 brothers are watching. The 12 brothers are witnessing their Uncle Esau forgive their father for being a betrayer, which is profound, because those 12 brothers, or 11 or 10 of those brothers, who witnessed forgiveness from their uncle, who witnessed the pain of the betrayal of their father as a brother, those same 12 men, or those same 10 brothers, ended up following in their father's very footsteps. They betray their younger brother. They lie to their father. They break up their family. They deceive, you'll read about it this week, an entire city and end up murdering its men. They are deceptive people. They are following in the footsteps of their father, which is again something we see in families all over the show. You can witness the pain of something that happens in your family line and still repeat that behavior in your own life. But anyway, I'm not here to talk about devotional stuff, all right? That's up to you to come up with that this week. But the main point of this story, just to get back to the historical context for a moment, is this whole thing about roots determining roots. Remember, Genesis is all about the origins of God's people, and the whole reason this story is told to ancient Israel, to the people of Moses' day, as they've left Egypt and they're going to the promised land. That's who it's written for, okay? The reason this story is told to them is so that they know where they have come from, and so they can have confidence into where they are going. So this week, again, is about origins. The origins of Israel's name. The origins of the 12 tribes. The origins of how God's people end up in Egypt. And the amazing way that this story is told demonstrates this to God's people. God's people did not end up in Egypt because they were born slaves. No, they were a proud people with a proud legacy. In fact, what this story shows, get this, is that the whole reason Pharaoh was so powerful, the whole reason Egypt was so wealthy, the whole reason Egypt had such a large domain that it conquered, was all because of Joseph. God's people, in fact, God himself, was responsible for the rise of Egypt and for the rise of that empire. That's what Genesis, this story in Genesis, tells us. And so God's people, when they are escaping Egypt, how the heck can we get away from this massive world power? This story is told so they know God made Pharaoh who he is. And if God made him, God can break him. Pharaoh is not the God of over all the gods. Yahweh, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God of our forefathers, he is the greatest of all gods. He made Pharaoh what he is, and he can release us and cause us to come out with freedom because he is no match for how strong our God is. Friends, you are reading a book of mystery and you are reading a book of history. And as you've heard many times before, history is his story. So enjoy it today. It's the story of God's people, and most importantly, it is the story of God's ongoing dealings with his people, and you're going to enjoy the readings this week. Get to it, do it in one sitting, but to week 4, chapter 30 through to 47, and if you read the end of Genesis in chapter 50, you're welcome to, if you want to cheat and get a few chapters there. All right, bless you guys, have an awesome autumn, and I'll catch you next month. Bye. That's it for today's lesson. I really hope you enjoy your readings this week. Remember, allow yourself time to read as much as you can in one sitting. Don't get lost in the detail. Just keep going and watch the Bible's big story unfold before you. Remember also to hit me up on our social media channels or website, and I'll see you next time.